Michael B. Jordan stood at the bustling Los Angeles International Airport, blending into the crowd as much as a global movie star could. Dressed in casual attire, he sported a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of sunglasses that only partially concealed his identity. He was on his way to Atlanta for a press tour promoting his latest movie, a film that tackled themes of resilience and justice, two concepts that would soon prove more personal than he expected. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The airport was alive with its usual symphony of sounds, rolling luggage, snippets of conversations, the distant hum of announcements. Michael moved through security with practiced ease, a man accustomed to the formalities of travel. But as he stepped toward the TSA checkpoint, he noticed something peculiar. The agent who had been waving passengers through suddenly seemed more alert, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Michael. A moment later, he signaled another agent, and together they stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," the first agent said, his tone curt. "Can you step aside for additional screening?" Michael paused, lowering his sunglasses slightly. His mind registered the agent's stiff demeanor and the way their eyes darted over him, not with recognition, but suspicion. He'd flown through LAX countless times before, his name undoubtedly known to many. Yet this moment felt different, heavier. He complied without hesitation, stepping to the side while the line of passengers continued to flow uninterrupted. The additional screening began with a thorough pat-down and swabbing of his hands for traces of explosives, standard procedures. Yet the scrutiny felt far from routine. The second agent rifled through his carry-on bag, pulling out personal items with little regard for their placement. Michael observed silently, his calm demeanor masking the growing knot in his stomach. The other passengers in line began to notice, their eyes flitting between their phones and the scene unfolding nearby. Whispers began to ripple through the terminal. As the search dragged on, Michael finally broke his silence. "Is there a reason I'm being singled out?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. The agent avoided his gaze, muttering something about random checks. But the explanation rang hollow. The phrase, an all too familiar refrain used to justify actions that felt anything but random. Michael had lived long enough, experienced enough to recognize the subtle and insidious presence of racial bias. Here he was, a man who had achieved global fame, whose face graced billboards and movie posters, still reduced in this moment to a target of suspicion because of the color of his skin. A younger agent nearby seemed to recognize him, her eyes widening as she whispered to a colleague. But rather than stepping in, she hesitated, as if unsure whether to challenge the unspoken hierarchy of the moment. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Michael could have let it slide. He could have endured the humiliation silently, swallowed the indignity as countless others had before him. But something inside him stirred, a sense of responsibility not just to himself but to the people watching, both in the terminal and beyond. He was Michael B. Jordan, but he was also every black man who had ever been unjustly profiled, every person who had been made to feel lesser in a space that should have treated them as equals. Straightening his posture, he addressed the agent once more, his voice now carrying a resolute edge. "I understand you have a job to do," he said, locking eyes with the man, "but this doesn't feel like a random check. It feels targeted, and I think you owe me, and everyone watching, a better explanation." The agent shifted uncomfortably, his authority faltering under the weight of Michael's steady gaze. By now, a small crowd had gathered, their phones raised to capture the unfolding drama. The whispers grew louder, and the younger agent, emboldened by the mounting attention, finally stepped forward. "Sir," she said, addressing her colleague, "I think this has gone far enough. There's no indication of any issue here, and frankly, we're drawing unnecessary attention." The senior agent hesitated, his expression flickering between irritation and embarrassment. Reluctantly, he stepped back, signaling an end to the search. Michael retrieved his belongings, his movements deliberate as he packed his items back into his bag. But he wasn't finished. Turning to face the crowd, he removed his sunglasses, revealing his unmistakable face. The murmurs crescendoed into a collective gasp, and he raised a hand to signal for quiet. "I don't share this moment to draw attention to myself," he began, his voice steady but resonant. "I share it because it's a reflection of something far bigger than me. This isn't just about an inconvenience at an airport. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and the systems that allow those biases to go unchecked. The crowd hung on his words, their phones now streaming live to countless viewers. Michael spoke with the conviction of someone who had spent years navigating the intersections of fame and identity, of privilege and prejudice. He recounted not just his own experience, but also the broader reality faced by people of color in spaces that should be neutral, but too often aren't. This moment could have happened to anyone, he continued, to the young man heading to his first job interview, to the mother traveling to see her child, to the student on their way to college. And that's why it matters. By the time he finished, the terminal was silent, the usual cacophony of airport life momentarily stilled. The TSA agents who had initiated the confrontation looked on, their expressions a mix of shame and discomfort. Michael slipped his sunglasses back on, his presence as commanding as ever, and turned to board his flight. The incident quickly went viral, with videos flooding social media under hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #MichaelBSpeaksOut. News outlets picked up the story, praising Michael's poise and courage in addressing such a fraught issue. Celebrities and activists alike joined the conversation, using the moment to amplify calls for reform in airport security practices and beyond. But for Michael, the moment wasn't about personal glory or headlines. It was about leveraging his platform to shine a light on a pervasive injustice, to spark a conversation that might bring about change. And as his flight soared above the clouds, leaving the airport behind, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, there is an opportunity to stand for something greater. Michael sat in his seat on the plane, the hum of the engine a comforting backdrop as he looked out the window. The sprawling city of Los Angeles was quickly shrinking beneath him, but the events at the airport still loomed large in his mind. The confrontation hadn't been planned. It had simply happened, a moment of truth in an ordinary day. But now, he couldn't help but think about the impact it might have. Would it spark a real conversation? Would it make even one person rethink the subtle biases that shape their actions? He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes, but the thoughts refused to subside. They took him back to his childhood in Newark, New Jersey, where he'd first encountered the dualities of his identity. Growing up, his parents had instilled in him a sense of pride and resilience, teaching him to navigate a world that often judged him before he even spoke. He thought of his mother's gentle but firm reminders. Keep your head high, but stay aware. Those words had carried him through countless moments like the one at the airport. Moments of unfair scrutiny, coded language, and silent judgments. As the plane cruised through the sky, he found himself reflecting on a pivotal experience during his teenage years. At 15, he had been stopped by police while riding his bike through his own neighborhood. They had accused him of stealing it, their questions sharp and accusatory. It didn't matter that it was his bike, or that he lived just 2 blocks away. What mattered in their eyes was that he fit a profile. That experience had stayed with him, not as a source of bitterness, but as a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. The memory spurred another thought, the responsibility he now carried as a public figure. Fame had given him a platform, one that could be used to highlight injustice and amplify the voices of those who often went unheard. But it was also a double-edged sword. Moments like the one at the airport showed that no matter how successful or visible he became, he was still not immune to the prejudices embedded in society. It was a humbling realization, but also a call to action. He opened his eyes and reached for the notebook he always carried with him. Writing had become his way of processing the complexities of life, a habit he'd picked up during the early days of his career. As he flipped to a blank page, his pen hovered for a moment before the words began to flow. He started jotting down ideas for a potential project, a documentary exploring the intersection of race, bias, and everyday interactions in public spaces. The airport incident was just one example among countless others, but it could serve as a compelling entry point. Through interviews, personal stories, and expert analysis, he could create something that not only informed, but also inspired change. The more he wrote, the more the project took shape in his mind. He envisioned sitting down with people from all walks of life, activists, sociologists, historians, and everyday individuals who had experienced profiling firsthand. He wanted to dive into the historical roots of systemic bias, tracing its evolution from overt discrimination to the subtler, more insidious forms that persisted today. And he wanted to explore solutions, highlighting the work of organizations and individuals striving to dismantle these systems piece by piece. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Michael closed his notebook, a sense of determination settling over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he had the drive and the resources to make a difference. And that was enough to get started. After landing, he was greeted by his team, who whisked him away to a press event for his latest film. The energy in the room was electric, the reporters eager to ask questions about his role, the movie's themes, and his creative process. But it wasn't long before someone brought up the airport incident. "Michael, your actions at LAX have gone viral," a reporter said, her voice carrying both curiosity and admiration. "How do you feel about the attention it's receiving?" Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's a bittersweet feeling," he admitted. "On one hand, I'm glad the conversation is happening. These issues need to be addressed, and if my experience can shed light on them, then that's a good thing. But on the other hand, it's frustrating that these conversations are still necessary. We've made progress as a society, but there's still a long way to go." The reporter nodded, her pen flying across her notepad. Another journalist chimed in. "Do you see yourself taking further action on this issue, maybe through your platform or future projects?" Michael's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I'm always thinking about how I can use my platform to create meaningful change. I can't say too much right now, but let's just say this isn't the last time I'll be speaking out about this." The press event concluded, but the buzz surrounding Michael's words continued to grow. Social media was ablaze with discussions, ranging from personal anecdotes to policy debates. The hashtag #MichaelBSpeaksOut trended for days, sparking a wave of solidarity from people who shared their own experiences with profiling and discrimination. Celebrities and activists joined the conversation, commending Michael for his courage and using the moment to advocate for broader change. Behind the scenes, Michael began reaching out to potential collaborators for his documentary project. He connected with civil rights leaders, academics, and filmmakers who shared his vision. Each conversation added new layers to the project, transforming it from a vague idea into a fully fleshed out plan. He even reached out to the TSA, hoping to include their perspective in the documentary. To his surprise, they expressed a willingness to participate, acknowledging the need for transparency and reform within their organization. As the weeks turned into months, Michael juggled his film career with the demands of the documentary. He traveled across the country, interviewing people who had been profiled in airports, stores, and other public spaces. Their stories were heartbreaking and infuriating, but also deeply inspiring. Many of them spoke of resilience, of finding ways to reclaim their dignity and fight back against the systems that sought to diminish them. One interview in particular stayed with him. It was with a young woman named Aisha, who had been stopped at an airport while traveling to her grandmother's funeral. The experience had left her shaken, not just because of the humiliation, but because of the sheer vulnerability of the moment. "They didn't see me as a person," she told Michael, her voice trembling. "They saw me as a threat, as a problem to be dealt with, and that's what hurt the most." Her words echoed in Michael's mind long after the interview ended. They reminded him why he had taken on this project in the first place, not just to expose the problem, but to humanize it, to show the world that behind every headline or statistic was a real person with a story worth telling. The documentary, titled Beyond the Checkpoint, premiered at a major film festival the following year. The audience was captivated, many moved to tears by the raw honesty of the stories and the unflinching examination of systemic bias. Critics praised the film for its depth and nuance, calling it a necessary wake-up call for a world still grappling with the legacy of inequality. For Michael, the documentary was more than just a project. It was a testament to the power of storytelling as a tool for change. It didn't solve the problem overnight, but it sparked important conversations, encouraged new policies, and inspired countless individuals to stand up against injustice. The success of Beyond the Checkpoint marked a turning point in Michael B. Jordan's journey as not just an actor, but an advocate for social justice. The documentary's impact rippled far beyond the festival circuit, making its way into classrooms, corporate training sessions, and community discussions. Universities invited Michael to speak about the film and his experience at the airport, and his talks often ended in standing ovations. He realized the power of sparking dialogue, not through lofty speeches, but through relatability and authenticity. Despite the accolades, Michael didn't see the documentary as an endpoint. For him, it was a launchpad for deeper action. The project had shed light on racial profiling, but the question of what came next loomed large. He spent weeks consulting with grassroots organizations, community leaders, and legal advocates. He wanted to make sure the momentum wasn't lost, that the awareness raised by the documentary translated into tangible change. One such conversation stood out. He met with a civil rights attorney named Marcus, who had spent decades fighting cases of racial discrimination in public institutions. Marcus spoke candidly about the legal and systemic barriers that made change slow and arduous, but emphasized the importance of persistence. "Awareness is step one," he said to Michael during a meeting in New York, "but accountability? That's step two. Without consequences, the system doesn't learn." Inspired by this, Michael decided to create a foundation dedicated to combating racial bias and profiling in everyday life. Named the Equity Initiative, the foundation aimed to tackle systemic issues through education, policy advocacy, and legal support. Its mission was threefold: to provide resources for those who had been unfairly targeted, to offer bias training for institutions, and to advocate for reforms in practices like airport security screenings. With the foundation in place, Michael found himself at the forefront of a movement that was bigger than any single person or incident. The Foundation's first major undertaking was a partnership with major airports across the United States to implement new anti-bias training programs for TSA agents. Michael worked closely with experts in behavioral psychology and diversity education to develop the curriculum. The training wasn't just a box-checking exercise. It delved deep into the roots of unconscious bias, challenging agents to confront and unlearn the stereotypes that informed their split-second decisions. It was an uphill battle to get buy-in from some stakeholders, but Michael's commitment and the public pressure from beyond the checkpoint gave the initiative the traction it needed. Meanwhile, the Equity Initiative also launched a legal aid program to support victims of racial profiling in filing complaints and seeking justice. Michael knew that many people lacked the resources or knowledge to challenge such incidents, leaving the perpetrators unaccountable. The legal aid program sought to level the playing field, ensuring that no one had to face the fight alone. As the Foundation's work expanded, Michael also found himself navigating the delicate balance between his public and private lives. He was still an actor, after all, with scripts to read, roles to play, and premieres to attend. But something had shifted in him. The thrill of landing a blockbuster role or seeing his name in lights no longer compared to the fulfillment he felt from this new chapter of his life. He often spent late nights reviewing reports from the Equity Initiative or brainstorming ideas for future campaigns, driven by an unshakable sense of purpose. The media, of course, followed his journey closely. Interviews with Michael often revolved around his dual role as an artist and advocate. When asked if he ever felt overwhelmed, his answer was simple but profound. "I'm lucky to be in a position where I can make a difference. If it ever feels like too much, I remind myself that there are millions of people out there facing these challenges every day without the resources or platform I have. That keeps me grounded. That keeps me going." 1 year after the release of Beyond the Checkpoint, Michael stood on stage at an awards gala for his foundation. The room was filled with supporters, collaborators, and beneficiaries of the Equity Initiative's work. As he addressed the crowd, his voice carried the same conviction he had shown at the airport that fateful day. "This journey started with a moment of discomfort, a moment of injustice," he said. "But what it's grown into is proof of what can happen when we refuse to stay silent. The work we're doing here is just the beginning. We've made progress, but there's so much more to achieve. And together I know we can build a world where no one has to face what I, and so many others, have faced." The audience erupted in applause, but Michael didn't bask in the spotlight. Instead, he used the moment to draw attention to the real heroes, the activists, lawyers, and ordinary people who had fueled the movement. He shared their stories, reminding everyone that change was a collective effort. As he left the stage, a young man approached him, nervous but determined. "Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to thank you. Your documentary, your foundation, it's changed my life. I was profiled at my job and I didn't know what to do. But because of your work, I found the courage to speak up. And now, things are finally changing." Michael shook the man's hand, humbled by his words. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had chosen this path, why he continued to push forward even when the challenges seemed insurmountable. Fame might have opened the door, but it was the impact, the real human impact, that made it all worthwhile. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on Michael B. Jordan confronting racism at the airport? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.